Good evening, everyone. And in case you are in different parts of the world, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me on this panel. So when I was putting, insights together for today, there were so many interesting things that for a while, I really didn't know what to let go and what to include. And finally, I came to the conclusion that why don't we look closer to our lives? Why don't we look at trends which somewhere down the line we instinctively know are true? But how about we put numbers to them and reinforce, and then look at how we can use them to change things, to sustain things, and to look forward to a better future that we have in our minds. So I hope today's trends are going to give insights and directions to the various initiatives that today's audience is undertaking. I'll just take a moment to share my screen so that there's no further delay. Okay, so one of the starting points of looking at digital media would be to look at how is consumption happening on various platforms. So I took something very simple. I just looked at desktop and I looked at mobile. And I saw that globally, the time spent on mobile continues to increase. What you see on this slide is essentially the percentage of minutes that are spent on mobile as a part of the total minutes spent on the internet. And on the right, if we look at India and Indonesia, we see that countries like India and Indonesia are leading the trend where more and more time spent online is actually through mobile. So what does that mean for us? Of course, we can use it in many ways, but a prominent thing would be that if you want to influence the masses, if you want to get your message out, mobile has to be central to your strategy. I just included some of the timelines so that when we look at various trends, we can put them in perspective of, how are things pre-COVID, how are things, during the lockdown, and what happened after there was the unlock. So looking at this table, while we found first cases of COVID somewhere in January, but India pretty much was living its normal life. It was only until late March that we started getting impacted and we started into a lockdown. And then we had April and May, which were complete lockdown months. And finally in June, we started seeing unlock in phases. Now, what did that impact? What did that have? How did that impact our consumption of content? So strictly digitally speaking, as our outdoor activities came to a halt, we saw impact on content of sports and travel. So if you see on the left-hand side, you see content categories like car transportation, which would include interaction with apps like Ola and Uber, sports sites and apps, airlines, hotels, resorts, home sharing, which would be your Airbnbs and different sites of the hotels. Everything saw a decline. But because we were confined in our homes, our need for connection, our need for entertainment, more importantly, because there were uncertain times, our need for getting the right information skyrocketed. So on the right-hand side, you see increase in the total visits of content categories like social media, gaming, news information, even religion and spirituality, because somewhere down the line, we needed that strength within ourselves to look at what our lives are going to be, and we really didn't know what uncertainty lay ahead. But the moment, and all this trend is from January to April, which was, we were slowly heading towards the lockdown and what the peak of lockdown had for us. Now, the moment we look at the trend after the lockdown, so let's say, towards October, we just see the trend reversing. So if we look at April, which was the middle of the lockdown, and then we look at trends all the way to October, which is about a month or two away from today, um, we look at a reversal in this category. So you have slight correction in social media, news, gaming, religion, spirituality, though we cannot say that it was back to pre-COVID levels. The levels of reversal kind of differ. But at the same time, there was a revival in transportation, in travel, especially in sports, because we saw IPL coming in and it skyrocketed. So both for correction as well as revival, we really have to look in depth in terms of what is happening with these content categories. How much are they reviving, or how much are they correcting after a huge spike? And what does that say about our lives, and how can we use that? So another trend to look at is business continuity tools. Simply because people were in a lockdown didn't mean that they would stop working, that they would stop looking or put things on hold. In fact, they became even more creative in terms of how to collaborate with each other when they could not work together in offices. And that is where you look at all these tools like Zoom, GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, Microsoft Teams, and so on. And if you look at the trend, we are looking at the time spent on them, which would be like how much engagement was happening in these with these apps. And between January to October, if we look at Zoom, there is a 12,000% increase in the time spent with this app. We look at GoToMeeting, it is 6,000%. So these times, and I mean, this is the kind of spike that we have not seen ever in the past. So we know how COVID confining us just gave us another way of collaborating. An important thing to note is that while there was a spike, the spike started during the lockdown. But even now, after many offices are either completely or partially opened, the engagement continues to increase with these apps, which tells us the kind of choices organizations and individuals are making in terms of how they want to collaborate and how they want to work. And our offices and office space is going to be mandatory like it was in the earlier days. Another category of apps that has emerged are the apps which are required to track the spread of pandemic and get as much information as we need so that we can curtail it. These apps came into existence at different times and gained traction as early as April, to some of them gaining traction as late as September 2020. But this clearly says the amount of effort that governments took, that citizens took, and the key role that communication and technology had when it came to tracking and understanding what this pandemic was all about and what it was doing to the people. And it is interesting to know that India is the only democracy which actually made the use of this app compulsory for its citizens. And we had to download this app for our tests for COVID at government centers and so on. And this kind of reflects in the kind of reach which is represented by unique visitors in the first column and the kind of engagement that the app had. Another impact that we see is of sites which are hosting content which is specific to kids. So this graph actually shows the kind of increase in the time spent that happened on kid-specific sites and applications between January and May on the left-hand side of the graph. And we see there was more than 100% increase. And after the lockdown, which is from May to October, there was a slight correction, about 19%. but it is nowhere down to what it was in January. Now, this clearly says that our dependency on online content for kids has increased to keep them engaged, given that their outdoor activities are massively curtailed, their schools are shut down, and even though they might have online schools, but you still need kids to be engaged with certain content which is safe for them, and parents are kind of flocking to these sites and apps. Home improvement wasn't behind, as homes doubled up to home and working from home, home offices, and home schools. People had to refurbish their space, repurpose their space, and we saw that happening with people increasing their engagement with home improvement sites such as HDTV or Architectural Digest and so on. And it was nearly the engagement with these sites, or the amount of time spent on these sites, was increased nearly 70% from January to May. And again, the reversal was very quick. The moment lockdown opened, they got some respite, not that they were still not working from home, but somewhere down the line, this wasn't the top priority on people's minds, and this trend quickly corrected somewhere after the lockdown opened up. We cannot talk about the impact of COVID on media without giving social media its due diligence. So social media is a fairly, it is a very largely penetrated category. 96% of the audiences who are online access some form of social media. It could be Facebook, it could be WhatsApp, it could be just a pinging on and posting on Instagram. And as of October, people have spent close to, in the month of October, they have spent close to 424 billion minutes on sites belonging to social media. Now, if we look at the trend, we see that in the beginning of, in the peak of the lockdown, there was a huge spike. The time spent increased about 32%. And while there was a correction after the lockdown opened up, there was no way people were going back to not using social media. People needed this to stay connected while they were confined. But if you look at the graph, we see that in October, which is the really tail end of this graph, at 424 billion minutes, we are still higher than what we started with in January. So there are certain, long-term habits which are being formed, and I won't go as far as that they're not going away at all, but they will take a while to go away. So these are the top social media sites and apps as of October. On the left-hand side, you see a table which ranks the social media properties, irrespective of the platform. This includes their desktop and mobile traffic. And on the right-hand side, we are only looking at the applications which people are using to engage with each other. And Hangouts Meet is a new entrant in this in the top 10 ranking as a result of COVID, and the engagement and reach of this app really increased a lot. Another category that deserves a mention is online gaming. Online gaming normally reaches about 50% of the internet audience, but during the times of COVID, during the peak of lockdown, it reached as much as 70% of the online audience. And the time spent on gaming sites and apps increased by 92% between January and May, which is pre-COVID and the peak of the lockdown. And again, we do see a correction after May, which is the phase where the lockdown was opening. But as of October, the engagement with gaming sites and apps is still higher. So that says that there were people who took on to gaming, and there is a stickiness to this trend, and they're not giving it away. If we look deeper, we see a huge, Ludo King deserves a huge call out here. Gamession.com, which is the parent of Ludo King, was a distant 6th in All India ranking, and it jumped to #1 during the lockdown. And currently, as of October, it is sitting on #2. And Ludo King, which is its topmost application, it continues to be the #1 application, and it surged to the #1 position during the lockdown. It simply talks a lot about how people are collaborating. Ludo King is a simple game. It is not something that needs a lot of skill. It is not, a hardcore gamers game. Even families can just come together with, if they're in different cities and they simply started playing Ludo with each other. Entertainment was another pillar that was needed to keep people sane while they were in confinement. And it is, again, even before COVID, it was a very, the penetration of this category was extremely large. So in terms of, number of people who increased consuming entertainment might seem very small in percentage terms because we're talking about a huge base. But a good representation would be, again, time spent on this category. And we see that the trend is simply increasing. So again, there was a spike during lockdown, but the interesting thing is what happened after the lockdown. And the trend continues to increase. So people who got hooked on to online entertainment, they are not letting go of this habit. So what's keeping them entertained? What is happening within the entertainment category online? If we just look at these list of the top entertainment players, we are seeing that most of them belong to online streaming or OTT platforms or music streaming apps. Now, this is a habit because instead of going and watching a soap opera or maybe a sitcom on TV, now you are saying that I want to watch and binge back-to-back episodes on a Netflix or an Amazon Prime Video. Similarly, it goes for music, that I can have music on demand and I can stream it whenever I want. And while this was a trend which was taking shape even before COVID, this trend just leapt because of the pandemic. And before I end, I would touch upon some of the revival stories of sports. Sports reaches about 30% of the internet audience, and it literally reached 0% engagement in April and May. But then IPL breathed life into it, and we see it soaring high to even higher than pre-COVID levels. It's really interesting to see how it will be after this when, while sporting events are again opening up, but will people still look out for one IPL and give sports the kind of attention that it needs? Or is it going to be something which will be gradual and not chalky? And finally, we talk about travel, which was very, very deeply impacted. And it's showing some signs of revival immediately after the ban on traveling was revived. Essential traveling, let's say people who were stranded in a different city and now they were traveling back home and so on, started breathing life into this category. We still don't see people traveling as enthusiastically, let's say for a holiday and so on, but we do see some impact, but revival to the full extent is a long way to go. And what's fueling revival for travel is subcategories like car and transportation. That means people have started moving around in the city with their Ola and Ubers. There is slight revival in the online travel agent category. People are booking some airline tickets and so on. But as the graph shows, the complete revival is still far away, but these are just initial green shoots. So I would end by, 3 takeaways. People survived the lockdown with the help of, content online, such as news, entertainment, gaming, and being connected on social media. And some of these habits are long-term and they're not going back simply because the lockdown is open up. People are getting entertained online. They are taking on to streaming music. They are loving online gaming. And we do see deeply impacted categories seeing some recovery, though complete recovery is going to take a while.